Okay. Just to make sure everybody is on the same page and is on board in respect of what this whole conference is about, you can see on the screen the objectives. These are actually in your kits, but it is useful to just be reminded that this is about having a forum for leaders and decision makers at all levels in formulating a gender-responsive legislation and programs related to gender in climate change and disaster risk reduction. Please note, there are two parts to it: climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction. Okay, specifically we said we want to have a better understanding of the phenomenon of climate change, its impacts, and its implications, and study the appropriate risk reduction strategy, to review and examine the gender aspects in climate change and disaster risk reduction, and formulate appropriate actions to address these. Next slide, please. Okay, to define the roles women can play in addressing the impacts of climate change and disaster risk reduction programs and policies at the global, national, and subnational levels, and to identify and define the action agenda for parliamentarians, policy advocates, and women leaders to support global and national actions to adapt gender-responsive legislations and programs related to gender in climate change and disaster risk reduction. Okay? Is that it? Okay. Now, in terms of the deliverables, what is this conference going to deliver? We will be having 3 substantive plenary sessions, and in the middle, we will have parallel sessions, 2 sets, one by theme and another by geographic region. After all of that, so notice that we're giving as much space for everyone to share their insights, their observations, their recommendations, and all of that will be reported out in plenary session 4. By the time we get to plenary session 5, we hope that we shall have put together 2 concrete outputs. One is what we have labeled the Manila Declaration and Call to Action, which should incorporate both climate change adaptation, disaster risk reduction, and cross-cutting it, overlaying it, should be the gender dimension. Please do not forget, there are 3 substantive things you'd have to make sure are being linked or will be linked in the course of the discussion. A second major output is that we will be able to put together a legislative agenda in support of climate adaptation and disaster risk reduction. At some point in time, we will come up with a draft. As I pointed out earlier, we have composed an ad hoc steering committee, which also will serve as the task force that will draft and craft this draft declaration and call to action. That draft is evolving and will incorporate, should incorporate, the inputs that you will feed into the discussions in the plenary and parallel sessions. So after plenary 3, we expect that there will be a draft that can be circulated and that you can take with you, and which you can make suggested modifications on. And we will submit this to the task force or the steering committee, who will then come up with a final draft, I should say pre-final draft, that will be presented in plenary 5, okay? And which will be deliberated upon by the whole body in plenary and which we will all endorse at the appropriate time. So, at the end of the day, we should come out of this meeting or of this Congress with a concrete output. And hopefully, you will be affixing your signatures to this declaration and call to action. We will be arranging that, okay? We will be having facilitators, myself, and co-facilitators. In fact, the task force, the steering committee, will be also working as co-facilitators. I know that we have had some volunteers. May I request them to touch base with us here or at the Secretariat after 5 so that we can properly assign the tasks. Now, in the parallel session, in the plenaries, you will notice, rather, the plenary sessions will be chaired, and we have requested our partners to chair and organize each plenary session. For the first plenary session, we will have a chair from the UN Environment Program. So I'd like to call on Clara Nobe to the head table, as well as the presenters to join us now at the head table so we can start with plenary session 1.